solar plus storage brings value all day long. Every day, you create a very robust, cost-effective solution that generates your sustainability and your economic value.
The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm your host, Tim Montague. Today on the Solar Podcast, powering security, savings, and sustainability. My guest today is Geoff Oxnam, the founder and CEO of American Microgrid Solutions. Welcome to the show, Geoff.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
So looking forward to learning more about American Microgrid Solutions. You and I got to know each other, maybe 18 months ago. And, here in the Midwest, solar and storage is a thing, but it's not nearly as much of a thing as on the coasts. And, it's great just to see that storage is really getting traction now. It has to do with price points as well as technology innovation. So give our listeners some background on yourself. How did you get interested in microgrids?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I've been involved and interested in microgrids for a good long while now. I have a background in utilities operations and management, having experience in electric, natural gas, water, wastewater, and telecom. But more importantly than the individual technologies, my background gave me the opportunity to work very closely with the communities that our utilities served. I spent the bulk of my career with a municipal utility and Eastern Utilities here in Maryland. And when you work for a municipal utility, your customers are your mom and your neighbor and your friends, and you begin to think about infrastructure as being the foundation of your local community. So you begin to appreciate that it's not just about electricity, it's about how all the pieces come together and sustain local businesses and the community as a whole. So as I was working in that space, one of the areas we saw evolving was certainly the concept of distributed generation, but also the emergence, particularly of storage technologies. You mentioned, at the top of the podcast, and the amazing opportunities that it was bringing, not just to that intuitive sense in us that says, well, storage is about backup. What we're starting to see is, no, storage is really about an awful lot more. Sure, it can help with resilience, but it can also really leverage your renewables. It can provide a wide array of financial benefits, and it can provide some system sustainability benefits to a local distribution system. That really captured my attention and ultimately drew me out of the utility business and very specifically into the microgrid and the hybrid power business.
So when I think of microgrids, I think of the grid, and then you have a facility that has some power generation. In my industry, it's solar. You have a battery for storing energy and giving you off-grid operation capabilities or grid service capabilities. But how do you define a microgrid?
Yeah, so the traditional definition of a microgrid is just that. It is multiple facilities using multiple forms of generation and or storage to operate connected with the grid while the grid is up and running, but having the ability to island itself, separate and sustain itself if there's a grid outage. So that's sort of the drier definition of what a microgrid is. As the industry has evolved, people have thrown around the term microgrid to mean a lot of different things. For some people, if there's a battery, it's a microgrid. Well, that's not necessarily the case. For us, it ends up being about the meeting the functional needs of a community. And that community may be as small as a building or as big as a neighborhood, but meeting their needs during 3 operating conditions, normal operating conditions, which in the United States is 99.99999% of the time. Meeting those needs during a power outage. Again, a rare occurrence in most parts of the United States, but we've seen them actually sadly become more impactful in certain areas, and we particularly see this challenge as we see an aging grid infrastructure. And then the third condition is during the recovery from that outage. So we try to think about microgrids as being support most of the time when everything's working well. So you want to have a system that provides economic benefits, sustainability benefits, and other benefits to the host, and then can take care of your needs, however you define those needs during the outage and the recovery from an event.
Yeah. And so you came from a municipal utility, Easton Utilities, where you certainly saw, and as you mentioned in the pre-show, how the utility itself is in essence a microgrid.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to start AMS, and what is American Microgrid Solutions?
Yeah, no, great question. So, yeah, it's funny. We're going back to the way communities evolved pre-rural electrification and the expansion of the modern grid, right? Because communities started out having to provide their own needs with a local power plant and other infrastructure assets. So the municipal utility model, everybody's sort of saying today, wow, that's super innovative and impactful. And yet there it was back in the turn of the century. So American Microgrid Solutions, we are microgrid and hybrid power system developers. We tend to focus on critical facilities and critical community facilities, everything from healthcare to public safety to senior living facilities, multifamily housing. We work with a lot of commercial customers, anybody who really values the combination of security being resilience or the level of service being provided by the system. Savings, all decisions ultimately come down to some level of economics. Sustainability is a huge driver. And then they're often, with a lot of the projects we work on, a fourth set of goals that a client might have related to social goals, maybe supporting community functions, and likewise. So we go out and originate projects, identify opportunities to be able to support a building, a community, whatever it may be, and then help them develop what their needs are, how a hybrid power system or microgrid might support them. And then we go and actually help them execute and implement a system, including bringing them not only the system itself, but helping them with the finance.
You know, you mentioned healthcare and public safety. There are 100,000 Americans in the hospital right now with COVID-19, unfortunately. We are in the midst of the worst pandemic that the United States has ever seen here in early December 2020. And so that is just staring us in the face, right? How resilient is that infrastructure? And then the backdrop of Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina that were really huge black eyes on our built infrastructure, demonstrating how vulnerable our infrastructure is to the forces of nature. And while we had a pretty intense hurricane season this year with the sheer number of storms, luckily none of them were as bad as Sandy or Katrina for the United States. I don't know if that's true for South America, but what is the state of the state, so to speak, of microgrid technology? Is it like the solar industry where we really have the technology
Yeah,
to green the grid?
great question. Yeah, the state of the of microgrid technology is that it is mature, that it is capable, that it's being deployed, um, that it's also adaptable. There are multiple different configurations. A microgrid isn't one thing. It's as much an approach as it is a specific technology. So when we look at the combinations of assets, solar has been around for decades and decades and decades now, and it's really proved itself even more robust than we originally thought these systems would be. Um, Storage has come of age. Batteries have been used in system energy storage, and batteries have been used in systems for a good long while, but they're now more flexible, adaptable, and scalable. And that's really the important part to the maturation of the industry. And then the magic piece in the middle, the controlled technology, has come of age not just technically but also financially. When we started this business, to talk about a microgrid controller, you were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, even if you had a very small system, or there were a lot of sort of home built DIY kind of approaches that were out there. The control systems have now been implemented by the military, by the government, by sites. They've been vetted, they've been tested. The robust ones have risen to the top, but at the same time, the price level has come down so significantly that we can deploy microgrids and hybrid power systems at a much smaller project size than we were able to only a few years ago.
You know, traditionally, of course, most facilities provide resiliency with backup generators, diesel generators, or natural gas generators that when the grid goes down, let's say in healthcare, right? If the grid goes down, it has an on-site generator, sometimes with an on-site fuel source, sometimes with a grid fuel source. But now we're expanding that portfolio with solar and batteries. Lithium ion technology has now arrived. Um, Tell us a little more about your target customers. What is the problem you're solving? And are you truly mostly retrofitting into existing microgrids, or are you building microgrids on facilities that didn't have one?
Yeah, great question. So, again, our typical customers are looking for a combination of things, and we work with them very closely to help them define those goals. That's one of the most important first steps, to really understand the question that one is asking, or the outcome that the customer is after. It is intuitive to think about the resilience component, but again, because you're interconnected with a system that has up almost all of the time, that resilience element of the system plays only a small role. What you can do with solar and battery, and even and in combination with other assets, is actually take advantage of a lot of economic and sustainability value that you can bring to the system. So we spend a lot of time working with our customers so that they understand what that value truly is. Problem with a generator is, for most applications, it's nothing more than a cost center, right? It sits there on the roof or in the yard or behind the building and does nothing but cause expense until that moment that you have an outage, and then it brings you its value. Solar plus storage brings value all day long, every day, and it's there to help provide the backup. It has limitations, and their cost considerations. And very often we find that by combining some of the resilience aspects of a legacy generation system, the diesel or the natural gas, with the solar and storage, you create a very robust, cost-effective solution that generates your sustainability value 99.9999% of the time, and your economic value during those conditions, and then can most cost effectively meet your resilience needs. I'd add too that I think one of the areas the industry and we as a country as a whole have a ways to go is valuing resilience. There is a value to resilience for every one of us. We may not have quantified what that value is. If you're a data center, you know it down to the nanosecond of downtime. You can measure that very specifically. When you are a apartment building, you're not always so clear on that until there's a Hurricane Sandy and people are trapped in their apartments. Then you start to bring that value. We haven't quantified that enough to really add that to the value stack quite yet. But when we sit down with our customers, we try to do that. We try to help them think about what that value proposition is.
Yeah. And that is a pain point, I have to say, for EPCs and developers, because that inevitably comes up very early on. Everybody wants resiliency, but valuing it is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give an example. In healthcare, we worked with a assisted living facility in Northern Illinois, Stevenson Nursing Center, and we installed a 500 kW solar array. And then in parallel, they upgraded their backup generator. There is legislation that requires these facilities to have off-grid capabilities for, I think, 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And they're leaning heavily on the generator. We did not install this system as a microgrid. So the generator is their main backup source. But even just starting that discussion of what is the value of resiliency, you quickly get to the question of, well, what is the value of human life? Because in an emergency, that truly is the value of having electricity. We're talking about being able to run equipment that keeps humans alive, or keeping the lights on so that lunch can be served. And so how do you deal with that, and how do you walk your clients through valuing resiliency?
Yeah, no, you point out that interesting breadth of how we as individuals and as a society as a whole try to do that calculus. And it depends again on each industry and each application. We have one project in which we're working with an irrigation district, and that irrigation district feeds the water to one of the most important crops in the United States. If those pumps go down, you have at the wrong time of year, you have a catastrophic loss to the local economy. In the, as you mentioned, in the healthcare facilities, you have a very specific operational toll and human toll. One of our clients with a senior living facility was talking about how they had an extended outage earlier this year due to one of the hurricanes. And while everybody was okay health-wise, they all lost everything, all their food storage. Those metrics we have to sit down and sort of tease out with our customers to understand where they truly value it. With some, if they're an office building, as long as critical servers are backed up, power goes out for a little bit, everybody goes home, and it's not as significant a loss to them. Others don't come to realize what the impact would be until you have an event like a Hurricane Sandy and find people stuck in their apartments, unable to get up and down elevators, or finding that the backup generators that they thought were going to be on were not quite as reliable as they are. I'd like to say that there was a magic formula to it, and a number of economists have worked on various models. It comes down to that individual facility and that function, and we just try to tease out the math with them to help them understand that.
Yeah, I would imagine it's one of the great values actually that you would offer to your customer base, is helping them discern what is the value of resiliency and being able to operate off grid. And it truly will be different for every type of organization and every individual project. Well, let's talk some specifics about your organization and the let's walk through some examples of projects that you are delivering here. I'm sharing your website, and I opened the podcast with your tagline, powering security, savings, and sustainability. And then you've got these nice 3 buckets: savings, security, sustainability. Let's walk through those, and then let's dive into 1 or 2 case studies in the 15 minutes that we have here.
Sure, happy to do it. I'll start with the security piece because, again, it's where people focus the most, and yet the other 2 become really critical drivers in unexpected ways. So the security is the resilience component, right? Our clients expect that their systems will be up and running in the event of a power outage. Now, it isn't that they always expect 100% of their service to be up and running. And that's a critical determinant when we size systems. For some customers, it's okay to have a portion of the building or building systems. For others, it does have to be 100%. A big part of the value that American Microgrid Solutions brings is we sit down with customers to make sure that step 1, we clearly define their goals. What are your operational goals, financial, sustainability, and other goals? Second of all, what are your constraints? If you're going to take something, out of the toolbox, if you're going to say, well, hey, we're not going to use conventional generation at all, we only want to use solar and storage. Okay, we understand, but that's going to limit some of your choices. Everybody has a budgetary constraint and others. So we try to work with those, and then we get into the weeds of what local regulations and incentive programs and all of that's about. So when you have those pieces together, you can get in and understand what is the security component, what are the critical loads in the building that you need to power during an outage, how long an outage duration, and that's different all over the country. When we look in the Northeast, we're generally thinking about a worst case 72-hour window. Pacific Northwest, where you're worried about earthquakes, we're designing for a 2-week window, so it can range. The second piece in that, we'll talk about the savings or the financial impact of these systems. Again, most of the time, the grid is up and running, and the microgrid that we've designed is going to be interconnected to that grid. So how do you use those same assets to generate savings on your utility bill, value stack from incentive programs like renewable energy credits? How do you monetize the various tax incentives like the ITC? How do you use tools like accelerated depreciation? What other tools are out there that can support a project? We spend a lot of our time pulling those together for a customer and helping them understand the life cycle cost of their system. I joke an awful lot that the electrical engineering side of it's actually relatively easy. It's the financial engineering that takes the work. And it really is. There's a cost associated with any system and solution. There's a benefit to those. Matching those and delivering the value that the customer needs, that's where we spend the bulk of our time. Piece of it, the sustainability has been so exciting to see, not just from the on-site renewable generation, but increasingly what we're no longer asking the grid to do in a very inefficient way. Our power grid in the United States, the reliability, which is phenomenal, has been based on oversizing everything. Build twice as much, 3 times, whatever you need to make sure that you're able to deliver power on that 1 hour of that one day of the year. Well, that's really expensive, and we all pay for that. And there are a lot more efficient ways to be able to operate on site. Microgrids actually do a pretty good job of helping to reduce those costs and reduce the demand on the grid at the time when it's at its dirtiest, right? When those peaker plants come on. If we can help bring that back through a variety of different tools, the sustainability impact becomes huge. So those are really the 3 areas that are core to our mission. As I said earlier, very often clients have a look at this in the broader social context. Is this making our community stronger? At the very beginning of the program, I said, I come out of municipal utilities. I come out of this community experience. To us, that is part of our DNA. We want to make communities stronger. And we think that giving them the tools that hybrid power and microgrid offers does that.
Great. Well, let's give our listeners 1 or 2 examples of projects. What would you like to, I'm sharing the screen with your projects page. What would you like to discuss?
Sure. The first one you're looking at there, it was great to work with the U.S. Geologic Survey in Baltimore. This was a straight solar project, but a very astute and attuned client where we worked with them on a variety of different energy solutions, and they then took the lead in improving their own internal operations. By the time we were all done, they were using only 20%, 20 to 30% of the electricity they had used previously and sustaining operations. It was pretty cool. The Cimarron District's case was a unique one for us and a really neat mission. Here you have a forestry station connected to the grid, but way out on the edge of it, way out. And this is a lightly used building most of the time, but when there's a forest fire in that section of New Mexico, this building becomes the staging grounds for the firefighters. So you have a very important mission that you need to keep the facility up and running. It can't sustain outages and still deliver coordination to the firefighters who need real-time maps, real-time data. Worse yet, this facility can be stuck on a line where the fire could be coming across. So we help them, again, relatively small system, but come up with a hybrid power system that would meet their goals. We've spent a lot of time, we're working in 16, 17 states right now. And each one brings its own sort of unique sets of needs. In Northern California, we're working with a facility that wants to become a resilience hub for its community. And its parking lot is literally the last parking lot one could park a car in safely during campfire. So it's right there on the edge of the wildfires, but it also obviously has to face the public safety shutoffs. Mentioned in Oregon, we're working on scenarios where you need to sustain if there's an earthquake for multiple weeks. Lots of work in Massachusetts where there have been very innovative programs established to create more incentives for solar plus storage. Each region offers its own unique set of challenges and opportunities, and those have been a lot of fun for us.
One of the backdrops to this, as we discussed in the pre-show, is FERC Order 222. Give our listeners some insight. Sorry, 2222.
Quad deuce is somebody I spoke to once called it.
The quad deuces, yes. So what is FERC Order 2222 and how does this impact the renewables and storage industries?
Yeah. So what the order is doing is really causing the regional wholesale markets to integrate as part of their programs distributed generation, and not just solar, but a wide range, including storage, more directly into the programs that those markets have. Why is that important? There have been challenges adopting or modifying regulations to understand particularly what battery storage is all about in the grid. When the regulatory regimes were set up, power flowed one way, right? It went downhill from the power plant down to your home. If you had a generator, that was pretty much a one-way, a big power plant, one-way flow. Well, batteries kind of break that model. They can go both ways. And for a long time, folks were scratching their heads saying, are they generators? Are they loads? We don't have the tools to be able to adopt that. And while early efforts were made to integrate them as a benefit into those grids, there were constraints put on them that made that a little bit difficult. I'll give you an example. In the PJM market, the world's largest wholesale market, serving mid-Atlantic and areas to the Midwest, batteries had, in order to participate in the PJM programs, had to have a 10-hour capacity. That's a big battery, and probably more capacity than you would really need to. It's hard to make that an economic asset. So you lose what a shorter duration battery could do because it didn't have the longer duration. We're seeing those old barriers start to fall out, and in part this order is making that move forward. So it's pretty exciting. But at the end of the day, while large or while the big picture federal and national regulations are important and whatnot, it comes down to the states, their public utilities commissions, and the individual utilities to really drive the bus. And that's where, particularly on a policy standpoint, it's important, probably more important to focus than always just on what the national trend means.
Yeah. Well, in the last few minutes, first of all, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, great. Love to chat with anybody who is thinking about a microgrid or a hybrid power system, or developers and financiers who are looking to support projects. We can be reached at www.americanmicrogridsolutions.com. It's americanmicrogridsolutions.com, all one word. Or you can give me a call, 443-496-2977. Again, 443-496-2977.
Great. And I want to make a few announcements. You can find all of our content at cesnrg.com/videos. The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm Tim Montague, host and creator of the show. I want to thank Geoff Oxnam for coming on the show. American Microgrid Solutions. We'll have to have you back as the DG solar and storage industry continues to take off. Thank you so much, Geoff.
Hey, Tim, thanks a lot. Really great to be here and appreciate the opportunity today.
Have a great day, everybody. Let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague. Take care.